Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to join you here today. So I'm with FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine, one of the smallest program areas within FDA. So it's obviously a large agency, and there's human medical product areas within FDA that are focused on AMR as well. I guess for my talk here today, I'm really focused on the component of this that CVM is primarily responsible for, with that relates to the veterinary sector. So for today, I think this was a topic that I introduced at last year's NIAA meeting. I think we had recently at that time published our 5-year plan. I know there's been a lot of discussion about 5-year plans. I guess it can get a little confusing. But basically we're now about a year out from having rolled out our plan last year. And so I wanted to give you an update on some of the activities that are ongoing related to that plan. And again, Dr. Siva referenced the National Action Plan. Our expectation is, would be looking to sort of nest many of the activities that we're working on up within the overall National Action Plan. Before that, though, I think it's important because of many of the things that we're working on under this new plan. We're sort of striving to build on some of the progress that we've made to date. So I think it's important to just first sort of provide some context about, what in fact has been accomplished, and sort of how we can sort of build on that moving forward. It's important to point out, and I think this was a huge undertaking where we got a lot of support from the industry to make this happen. This was an initiative that we've many are probably familiar with, Guidance 209 and 213, which was an initiative that was designed really to accomplish two main goals. Again, focused on medically important antibiotics, or antibiotics that have important therapeutic value for human medicine, to move towards making sure that those products in veterinary medicine, in food animals in particular, are only used when they're really necessary for addressing animal health needs, and that those uses are under the oversight of veterinarians. And those are some key principles that we identified when we initiated that whole effort, and really this goes back to, I think, 2010, when we started developing that idea, and really moved forward with implementing a plan to make those changes in 2013. Again, the focus of that plan was on medically important antibiotics. Again, from a risk perspective, the idea being that not necessarily all antimicrobials are created equal in the sense of how much concern we may have about them. But of course, antibiotics or antimicrobials that are important for human medicine are of greatest concern, because losing those products obviously would have significant public health impact. We also focused on the feed and water uses. Again, from a risk perspective, trying to start with those uses that have sort of the broadest potential impact in terms of the scope or extent to which they're used in animal agriculture. And again, the goal was to eliminate production or growth promotion uses, with the idea that those particular uses aren't specifically needed in terms of addressing a specific animal health condition, and so therefore we should turn our attention to other types of technologies to enhance growth and move away from using these important drugs. And then secondly, to bring all these products under the oversight of licensed veterinarians. Again, that effort was started in 2013. We set out a 3-year timeline. So essentially the clock started in 2013, target being January 1 of 2017 to complete all the changes. We reached out to the pharmaceutical company, their sponsors of these products, to seek their voluntary cooperation, which the good news was they all did, which we're very appreciative of that. And in the end, we were successful with a lot of help from a lot of folks of successfully hitting our target of aligning all those products with those two key principles. Again, focus on the feed and water products. And so, basically as of January 1, 2017, it's now any feed use of an antimicrobial requires a veterinary feed directive, which was a significant undertaking in of itself, since there were a very limited number of products that are regulated as veterinary feed directives back at that time, and now we have a large number that are. So there was a significant effort just to get everyone up to speed in terms of how the VFD process works. For any of the water use products, those products were transitioned to prescription status. And then as of that date, there are no longer any there's no longer legal to use any medically important antibiotic for production or growth promotion purposes. So with that, again, with all those changes going into effect in 2017, I think it's clear, and what this table just shows is a summary of the sales data that FDA has been reporting on with regard to with regard to antimicrobials that are sold or distributed for use in food-producing animals. This chart only focuses on those specific classes of drugs that we would consider medically important. And while certainly we need to, and I'll come back to this at the end, look at other information to sort of assess the progress that we're making on this overall effort, it certainly is notable that as seen here, we had seen a slow incline in sort of the volume of sales and distribution of these classes of drugs ever since we started reporting out summaries of that in 2009 to about a peak level in 2015, which is when we really started to begin to ramp up the changes that we were planning to make in terms of shifting products to vet oversight and eliminating growth promotion. And then, of course, the full implementation of that was in January 2017. So we saw a pretty substantial reduction in 1 year, 33% reduction in sales of medically important antibiotics between 2016 and 2017. Certainly, I think, this is important information to look at going forward, but I think there's other information we need to pay attention to as well. This is not simply all about reducing volume, but making sure that we're using the products as judiciously as possible and only when necessary. And so I think that's the challenge with this kind of, with sales data is there's more that we need to look at in order to assess whether we're really accomplishing those goals. So I think, again, as a stepping off point, I think it's important then that we try to identify what other steps do we need to take and try to build on the progress that we've made. I think from our perspective, what we found to be most successful was when we tried to pursue this in a collaborative way, bring all stakeholders to the table and try to come up with strategies to move things forward in a productive manner. So in September of 2018, we published our sort of 5-year plan, sort of laying out what we see as what are some of the key activities we want to focus on over the next 5 years, so that we can start, that engagement and develop plans for how we can make some additional changes. Again, moving to sort of meet the goal of making sure that we're using products as judiciously as possible. So again, it builds on the 209-213 initiative in the sense that while those were important changes, there's still more that needs to be done. The scope of this is really still focused on medically important antibiotics, recognizing that those are the drugs where we have the most concern because of the shared use essentially between human health and animal health. The one thing we have shifted a bit in terms of this plan is broaden the scope. Again, from a One Health perspective, it's important that we look across all uses. Much of the activity in the veterinary sector for years has been focused on the animal agricultural sector, or food animals in particular, and obviously we need to pay attention to other sectors as well, including uses in companion animals. So that's incorporated in this effort as well. So I'm not going to go through the entire plan in any detail, but just the 3 main goals with this plan are these 3 areas. And the first is really focused on the drug products themselves. This is the area that we FDA probably have the most direct, sort of responsibility influence over, because we're the regulatory agency responsible for approving and assuring the safe and effective use of animal drugs. And again, are there additional steps we need to take to make sure that antimicrobials that are used in animals, regardless of sector, how those products are labeled and used, are they really aligning with judicious use principles? And if not, what adjustments do we need to make? Second, are there things that we at FDA can help to do with fostering stewardship at the sort of user level, at the veterinary level, FDA doesn't regulate veterinary medicine. So here's an area where we're looking to partner with other organizations to support those efforts. And then the third area is really based on data, and it's critical that we make sure these efforts continue to be sort of tethered to the data and science. And I think that's been a challenge for us as we move forward on this issue, and it's certainly a challenge relative to the communications theme of this meeting, is really how to communicate what is a very complex issue, and how do we make use of the best data and best science to do that. And I think there's gaps that need to be filled to make sure we are gathering data and that the actions we're taking are informed by that data, and we can have that data to adjust as needed moving forward. So what I'd like to do for the rest of the time then is again, it's a very detailed plan. There's I think 3 goals, 9 objectives, roughly 30 action items in that plan. I'm certainly not going to go through all those, but what I'd like to do is highlight, I think, 5 actions or projects that are ongoing right now, just to kind of give you an update in terms of where those issues or initiatives stand right now. So first, and this goes back to my earlier, the actions are already taken under 209, 213. Again, we're focused on feed and water. So we've succeeded in shifting all feed and water uses of these important drugs to veterinary oversight. There still remain some non-feed and water uses, so some injectable products, a few other types of dosage forms like intramammary products, and maybe some oral products like boluses that are still available as over-the-counter. Farmers, ranchers can still access those products directly through various suppliers or their local supply store. But these products contain the same active ingredients, the same medically important antibiotics that we've now said really should have the oversight of a veterinarian. So I think it is our goal to basically address this by shifting those remaining products to veterinary oversight as well, or to prescription products. From a context, from a volume of sale or volume of product entering distribution, roughly 95% by volume of sales of medically important antibiotics are accounted for by feed and water. So what we're talking about here is by volume, like 5% of the market, so to speak. But of course, it's important not to downplay the significance of this, because these are the last sort of source for producers or ranchers who may want to directly access products. This is their last source for access, is these products. The challenge, of course, though, is they're outside the oversight of a veterinarian, and that's something I think that's a gap we feel we need to fill. So this effort, we've actually just published a draft guidance on this at the end of last month. This is very much in the same sort of vein as the Guidance 213 effort. We're looking to work with the pharmaceutical companies that market these products to basically phase in the transition of these products from over-the-counter status to prescription. The guidance is actually out for public comment right now. We've also published a list of effective products, which is, I think, just over 100 or so approved products for which that are medically important antibiotics that are still available over the counter. I would qualify that there's a fair percentage of those products that aren't actually being marketed. So the number of products that are actually in the marketplace is a smaller, percentage of that 100 products. And what's being proposed, what we have proposed with the draft we put out, is basically a 2-year phase-in period. The clock on that period would not start until we actually finalize the guidance, which is likely going to be, sometime next year. So there's still time before anything actually goes into effect. And of course, one of the things we're going to be focused on, between now and then, again, back to communication, is that we've got work to do to make sure that we're communicating with, those stakeholders that may be impacted by this. So just for context, I spoke about it in terms of volume of sales here. Just when you look at it with respect to, just numbers of applications. So what's in blue and gray there are essentially the products that were affected by the 209-213 initiative, the feed and water products. And you can see the bulk of those in blue. And so when you look at the total volume, the sort of mustard color are the other dosage forms, so the non-feed and water products. Blue being the blue and the gray represents all the feed and water products. So we're talking about about 108 products. And then if you look at the bars to your right, how that breaks out across different species groups. Again, by far, most of those uses are food animals, but we do have some companion animal products affected, for example, horses, and then some products that have both on the label. So I think it roughly breaks out where I think probably the sector that would be impacted the most, where there's the products with the most sort of indications of use, would be cattle. And then I think second to that might be swine, with a smaller number, pretty significantly smaller than cattle. And I think probably the third would be actually horses. So again, the intent here is shifting these products to prescription regardless of species. So this affects all species, including any companion animal uses that may be on the labels for these products. And then just from a timeline perspective, so at the top, again, we've just published the guidance. It's now out for public comment, which is the sort of the second row there. The target date for publication here that we've roughly put out here the end of 2020. If the guidance actually finalizes by the end of 2020, and then you factor in a 2-year, say, implementation period, the target would be to complete all of this by the end of 2022, and that's just sort of a rough estimate of what our expectations are around this initiative. And again, I think one of that sort of third line, I think we'll be actively looking for opportunities for outreach to make sure that we can let folks know sort of why we're doing this, what the timeline looks like, and make sure folks are informed as these changes approach. The second issue, briefly talk about, relates to, and again, this affects feed use products only. And one of the concerns that we've had as we did implement the changes related to the feed and water use and shift all those uses to veterinary oversight, and so these products are all under veterinary oversight. We eliminated the use for growth promotion, which again were really uses that were difficult to justify, given that they really were not targeted any specific animal disease condition. One other issue that we did identify that we feel needs attention is the fact that a number of these products, when they were originally approved, and again, many of these products may have been approved 30, 40 years ago, were not labeled with any specific duration of use. And so in some cases, the label is silent with regard to what duration should it be administered for, or in other cases, it explicitly says feed continuously. So I think from a risk perspective, the concern is, is that really aligning with what our current thinking is on judicious use? And can we do better to better target how these products are being used to treat, control, or prevent a disease, to focus better on and defining better, sort of how and when and for how long to use these products. And again, this is a significant undertaking. I mean, this is something that, again, needs to be based on science. And again, this is one that, is going to take a bit more time in terms of generating that science and affecting these changes. So again, this is focused, when we looked across all feed and water products, basically what the products that we identified that lacked a specific definition of duration turned out to be just some of the feed products, and there were roughly about 85 products affected. We published a list of affected products on our website. And so the target for this is a bit further out, since there's more work to be done to sort of develop this strategy. In this case, we've set a target date of the end of next fiscal year, end of September 2020, to develop a strategy for addressing this issue. Again, plan to develop a draft guidance, again, looking to collaborate with the industry on how to bring about these changes. I think the challenge clearly with this is that from our view, there's not a one-size-fits-all to this. We need to make sure that we identify and establish, more targeted use instructions or dosage regimens for these products based on the best available science. And given the current lack of data in some areas, we did publish a request or a funding opportunity last spring. Again, seeking applications to develop data that would help support updating these products. We did grant two grant proposals and published an announcement on that in this past month. Both of those proposals were on projects relating to cattle, one related to anaplasmosis control and the other related to liver abscesses, both for different researchers out at K-State. And we are looking for trying to determine if we can publish additional opportunities for funding in the near future. Moving on to another issue which is important and somewhat foundational. I've thrown around the term medically important a lot this morning. And again, that's generally the drugs we think are important in human medicine, and there is some more specific definition to what those specific drugs are. And that really ties back to a list that FDA published as part of one of its guidance documents back in 2003. And that's where this term it's actually an appendix to Guidance 152. And Guidance 152 is actually an assessment or risk assessment guidance that provides a framework for how drug sponsors who might be seeking approval for a new drug would conduct a risk assessment to evaluate AMR risks. And one component of that is sort of taking into account how important the drug is for human medicine. So we've used or leveraged that list as the way of defining what drugs are considered medically important. Now that list has about 16 years of age on it, we feel it's important to update it. And so that's something that we are working on now and do expect to initiate public input on that process this coming year, understanding that there's likely a lot of interest in this. So we're looking to make sure we have sufficient opportunities for public input on it. Related to data, we also recognize, and I mentioned earlier, the sales data. Certainly sales data is valuable and informative, but it has its limitations. It represents what's being sold or put into distribution, doesn't necessarily tell us what's actually being used or how it's being used. And I think that's a gap that we've been trying to see how we can fill. We did fund some projects back in March 2016 to develop methodologies for ways in which actual use data can be collected at the farm level. Two projects were funded in August of 2016. One project focusing on feedlot and dairy cattle. That's Mike Apley out of K-State. And the second project, broilers, turkeys, and swine, Randy Singer and Peter Davies out at Minnesota. We're now, I think, in our fourth year of a 5-year. I think we have one more year to fund after this year. And again, we hope to learn. I think we've been encouraged by the data that's and the progress being made with those pilot projects. The intent with this is to see what is to basically learn from these pilot projects and try to determine what are some workable pathways for moving forward and collecting this kind of information on this sustainable way. I know Randy Singer recently published a paper to provide an update on the data that he's collected so far from his project. I know the Mike Apley or the cattle and the swine projects are a little bit further behind. We do expect the data, or at least the updates on that from those projects to be coming out will be made available for the public as well. And then the sort of summing up, with regard to back to the issue or the need for having good data, and also making sure that we have the steps we're taking and the actions we're taking are being formed by good science, and that we have a way of assessing whether or not the things we're doing are making a difference and whether we're moving in the right direction. And I think one of the challenges is that we don't want to necessarily focus solely on sales volume as the driver. I think our focus is really on making sure that we're implementing good use practices, that antibiotics are only being used when they're really needed. And the outcome of good stewardship and judicious use likely means that you're curbing unnecessary use, and volume of use or sales would likely go down. But I think one is the outcome of the other. We're a bit hesitant about setting targets because that sort of loses connection to the primary goal, which is implementing good stewardship. As an alternative way, I think our view is that we need to look at this more holistically, and so we are working on a broader assessment report that tries to integrate sort of a broad set of information so that we're looking at this information in context. And this is something we're working on, hope to have out by the end of next year. Again, this would be the idea where we're pulling all the relevant information together, largely data that's already going to be in the public domain. We expect to summarize the data coming out of the pilot projects that I just mentioned. I know USDA has done work on surveys on use in terms of what we can learn from that data. NARMS data that's published on an annual basis. Of course, the sales and distribution data and any animal demographic information or animal health data, so that we can look at this information in a broader context in terms of assessing what progress we're making. So just in summarizing some of the key sort of milestones or publications that have happened recently, I think in August we actually did publish a summary of our VFD inspections that were conducted with I think 16, 17, and 18, and this was published in August. I think the good news was overall compliance was very good with the new Veterinary Feed Directive regulation. But anyway, this assessment sort of summarizes some of the findings from that. As I already mentioned, we published the OTC to RX draft guidance at the end of last month. That document's out for public comment right now. We expect the latest sales data report to come out probably in mid-December, so that will be for the 2018 reporting year. And we also hope to have the latest NARMS report out, which would actually be for the 2016 and 17 reporting years, which we're a bit behind on reporting for NARMS, and that's something that we've been working on. So in closing, I think significant progress has been made. I think our hope is to kind of build on the progress that we've made to date, and continue to pursue a collaborative approach. We need to obviously continue to focus on this from a One Health, and that's looking across all sectors, including all veterinary sectors. And the 5-year plan is sort of our CVM plan for helping to guide us, and again, it's sort of a living document that may need to be adjusted over time. And it's critical that all these actions be guided by good science and data. So thank you.